Tulip Siddiq with me now, Shadow Treasury Minister. Hi, what's Labour's position on Brexit today?
Well, it's quite interesting that you say today. We've actually been very clear from the summer onwards about our Brexit deal. But let's just be clear about the fact that this deal is the Conservatives' deal, and they've made a huge hash of it. After talking constantly about getting Brexit done, they've ramped up very divisive rhetoric with our closest trading partners. They made a huge hash of the Northern Ireland Protocol. They also signed a deal with Australia that the ministers themselves are now trying to avoid. So for us, the truth is they talked about getting Brexit done, but they didn't actually get anything done, and they've made a huge mess. Keir Starmer started talking in the summer about how we had 5 points that we wanted to get done if we were in government and that we would do things differently with the Brexit deal. So the first is we would definitely sort out the Northern Ireland Protocol. The second is
How would you do that?
Well, we have to have a proper conversation. They haven't even had a proper conversation.
DUP have said we're not getting back around the table unless it's scrapped.
But it's the divisive rhetoric between the government and the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the other things, like they said they would explore trading opportunities outside the EU. Rishi Sunak, after the G20 summit, in his statement, didn't say anything about a deal that was forthcoming with the US or with India. This mutual recognition of professional qualifications, which we've been talking about a lot with the EU, and that would be about letting our leading scientists and services do their work in the EU. I've mentioned that constantly in my role to my opposite number, Andrew Griffiths. There's never been any take-up on that. We've talked a lot about security. I mean, we are worried about security. There's a new security pact we've talked about from the Labour Party with the EU, which would be about data sharing and making sure that we keep our borders safe. I honestly feel the government has really let us down on Brexit. They've had an enormous amount of time to do something about it, and instead it's just been about fighting with our partners and not coming to a grown-up agreement, which is a really important thing for our future.
OK, just explain to me again how you're going to fix the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Well, it's about getting around the table and speaking to people and finding out a deal that works, and we just haven't done that.
DUP have said, unless it's scrapped, we're not interested.
But have they even had a proper conversation with DUP? I mean, people say things, but if you ramp up the divisive rhetoric like they have, obviously people are not going to get round the table. But in our party, we want to sit down with them properly and talk through. Of course, there'll be compromises on both sides, but I haven't even seen the government go out and have a conversation with them. And whenever it comes up, it feels like it's a closed book and, no, we're on one side, they're on another. It's not good for the country.
How does Labour feel about a Swiss-style Brexit?
Well, the points that we've laid out in the summer, which Keir Starmer and the ones that I've just gone through, are the ones that we want to follow.
How do we feel about free movement of people?
We won't go back to freedom of movement.
What about paying into the EU in order to get some services,
including
including a trade deal?
Well, we've talked about making sure that we have
as well.
influence. Well, we wouldn't go back to the things that have already been decided. So in terms of freedom of movement, in terms of the options that were on the table during the second referendum, that deal has been done, people voted, and no, we won't be going back to that.
Talk to me about what's going on at the World Cup. How much does Labour support what the England and Wales team are planning, i.e. the One Love armband and taking the knee?
I mean, personally, I think we've gone into a country where there's obviously been a lot of controversy about this in terms of the construction workers who died, about the human rights record of Qatar. In my opinion, anything we can do to highlight the plight of human rights abuse, or in terms of, like I said, the construction workers, anything that does, for me, is a good thing.
Is that why your leader's not going? Because he doesn't appreciate the level of human rights or lack of in Qatar?
Well, you know, I think he's a massive football fan. I mean, he talks about it all the time. So he'll
Arsenal
definitely...
fan, I know.
Yes, I'm sure you do know. He will be watching it from the pub or from his house and cheering people on. But, I mean, we've decided as a party that we didn't want to go. So no one from our party is really from the shadow DCMS minister is not going, Keir's not going. Yes, it's about where it's being held. Yeah, and he said he will use the platform to shine a light on what Wales is doing in the first time that they've qualified.
So why didn't Keir Starmer do that?
Well, I guess he felt that this wasn't appropriate for him to go because of the country.
Yeah, so Mark Drakeford's wrong.
He's not wrong, but everyone makes different choices.
You're either right or wrong on this one, aren't you?
Well, it's a broad political party. You must realise in your family...
You're either right or wrong.
It's a political family. He's decided he wants to go. It's the first time that they've played, and he obviously means he wants to... I'm sure he will be using his platform to shine a light on the things that we disagree with about the country.
What about David Beckham?
What about him?
Well, he's gone.
He has gone, but he's not a Labour Party politician, so I'm not quite sure.
Really? I didn't notice that. However, he is someone who is supposed to be a sports idol. He's someone who's campaigning very hard for a knighthood, and he's somebody that young people look up to. Is he the right person to be a representative for the Kuwaiti government?
It's his choice. I mean, this is David Beckham's job, but I haven't had. I was just thinking, he doesn't have. I haven't had a conversation with David Beckham. I've never met him, but I think, in my opinion, I probably wouldn't do the same thing if I were in his shoes.
But you know, he's a role model.
You can be a role model in some ways, and you don't have to agree with every single thing that your role model does. He's done an amazing thing in terms of promoting
£10 million
sport.
to represent a country that sees openly gay people beaten up to the extent, is such outrage to the extent that a comedian has shredded £10,000 of his own hard-earned money, whatever you think of that, in order to highlight the fact that this guy, who is supposed to be a role model for young people in the United Kingdom, is representing the Qatari government.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, in terms of, if you look at especially the record on LGBTQ, because we know how emotional that topic is and how difficult it is for people who are going through the transition at the moment, and the fact that you can't express your own sexuality in a country, and that you're told to be quiet and behave yourself and don't disrupt the status quo. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't do it. So.
What do you think about Shamima Begum and the case that she's appealing again to try to get her British citizenship back? That starts today. She's presently still in Syria. What would the Labour government do?
It's a really sad case, and I was just listening when you were presenting, saying 2 of the other girls are dead. I mean, it's horrible, because they were only children when
15.
they were taken out of the country and they were groomed here. You know, in my opinion, if you are groomed here and you feel like you were a child and you were taken out, we need to look at that compassionately. I think we'd have to look at all the arguments the lawyers are making, but I also feel like a 15-year-old girl who got groomed here and taken away, making people stateless like that.
They didn't get taken away, they chose to go.
They were 15 years old.
They were.
I mean, I'm not defending their actions.
IS brides.
But I also feel like if you get groomed in the way that they did, we've also got to look at what happens. Like, how did we get into a situation where social media platforms, which is how they got groomed, how did they even have access to that at the age of 15 and get into a position where they felt they could leave their families, travel abroad into a world which they really probably knew nothing about?
I did put that actually to the Home Secretary, then Home Secretary Sajid Javid, and he said, if we knew what he knew, she would never be allowed back in the country.
Has he shared that with us?
Well, he says if we knew what he knew, he's not going to tell us.
Well, that's
obviously for security reasons.
Well, that's a different story. I mean, if we were in government and we knew a lot more than what's just been presented in the papers, because that's all we know, really, or in the debate that we had in the chamber, I mean, that's a different story, right? I can't comment on that until I know what the details are. Maybe he does know something absolutely explosive that would mean that she shouldn't be allowed back in. Yeah, that's a different story.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Really appreciate it. Bear with me just one second.